The Los Angeles Reckoning. A Frank Murray Investigation. Season 3, Episode 10. Los Angeles greets you the same way it always does. With light. Not the tentative, conditional light of a northern city that offers sunshine the way a cautious person offers an opinion, carefully and with qualifications. Los Angeles light is committed, even in December, even at 6:15 in the evening when the flight from Frankfurt sets down at LAX, and the windows of the terminal catch it at an angle that turns a whole ugly functional building into something that briefly looks like it might have been designed to be beautiful. I hadn't been home in 8 months. Sarah had her hand on my arm as the plane taxied toward the gate, which was not a thing she usually did, and which she did now without apparent awareness that she was doing it, which is the kind of thing that tells you more than a conversation would. 8 months. Sold to Vienna, 7 cities, one criminal empire taken apart piece by piece across 9 time zones. 135 people. A verdict that hadn't happened yet, but was going to, in a federal courtroom in downtown Los Angeles in 3 weeks' time, because the United States Attorney's Office had filed charges that their own team had described as the most comprehensively documented criminal conspiracy they had prosecuted in 30 years. The gate opened. We collected our bags. Miles was waiting at arrivals. He was holding a sign that said Murray in letters that were larger than necessary, which was either irony or genuine enthusiasm, and with Miles Danforth it was always both. "You look terrible," he said, when we came through the doors. "Thank you, Miles," I said. "Both of you," he said. "Like people who've been in airports for 19 hours. He looked at us for a moment with the specific quality of a person who has spent 8 months coordinating at a distance and is now recalibrating the proximity. "It's good to see you, Frank." He said it quietly enough that it wasn't performance. "Both of you." "It's good to be here," Sarah said. Miles drove us back to 4th Street in Culver City, his warehouse, the monitors, the Consolidated Energy Drink collection, because he wanted us to see the full Pemberton case wall before the federal team dismantled it. 3 months of thread and index cards and printed satellite imagery, and the handwritten notes of a man who had spent a career at the NSA and then gone freelance and found, in the work of the past year, something that mattered to him in a way that government work had not. The case wall covered 32 feet of warehouse space. Sold to Vienna. Every connection, every ownership chain, every face. Miles stood in front of it with his arms crossed, and the expression of someone looking at a thing they had helped build and were not yet ready to take down. "It's quite something," Sarah said. "It's the whole thing," Miles said. "All of it. Everything we found." He was quiet for a moment. "I know it has to come down. The federal team need the originals. I just wanted you to see it while it was still all there." I looked at it. 32 feet of the shape of something that had been built to be invisible and had been made visible city by city, thread by thread, by 3 people and an expanding network of allies who would refuse to stop. "Leave it up until after the verdict," I said. Miles nodded. "That's what I was thinking." He drove us to 4th Street after that, the office above Golden Dragon, the smell of 5-spice and sesame oil coming up to the floor before we'd even reached the landing, which was a specific smell of the place that had waited for us and was, in its way, glad we were back. Before I go any further, if you followed Frank and Sarah all the way home, then you already know what this is. Hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell. This is the last stop. And now, Los Angeles. Detective was on my desk chair. Of course he was. He regarded my return with the particular quality of a cat who has been perfectly fine in your absence and wants you to know it. Both eyes. The gray for slightly longer than I remembered. The way things get slightly different in 8 months, whether you're watching them or not. He looked at me, decided I was acceptable, and went back to sleep. "He missed you," Miles said from the doorway. "He absolutely did not," I said. "He slept on your chair every single day you were gone." Miles said, "Draw your own conclusions." Mrs. Chin appeared at the top of the stairs approximately 4 minutes after we'd arrived, which was either coincidence or the result of surveillance operation conducted through the building's ventilation system, and she was carrying a container of soup that was still actively steaming, and a paper bag that contained what I knew before I opened it would be exactly the egg rolls I'd been thinking about somewhere over the Atlantic. "You're too thin," she said to both of us, which was her standard greeting after any absence longer than a weekend. "The soup smells extraordinary," Sarah said. "It's been warm for a week," Mrs. Shin said, with the straightforward satisfaction of someone who had decided a thing and done it. "I kept making a fresh pot. I knew you were coming." She set down the soup in the bag and looked at the office, at the case wall materials that Miles had been keeping here in parallel with his warehouse wall, the maps and the timelines pinned to the boards we'd installed at the start of Season 3. And her expression moved through something that wasn't quite emotion, but was adjacent to it. "Is it over?" she said. "Almost," I said. "Trial in 3 weeks. But the hard part, yes, it's over." She nodded once, in the way of someone who had been holding something and was now setting it down. Then she said, "Eat the soup before it gets cold again," and went back downstairs. Sarah and I sat in the office with the soup and the egg rolls and the smell of the place and Detective asleep on the chair, and I thought about the fact that this room had existed without us for 8 months and had somehow remained exactly what it was, the specific accumulated quality of a place that doesn't change because it doesn't need to. And that was one of the things about home that you don't fully understand until you've been away from it long enough. 3 weeks, Sarah said. 3 weeks, I said. Then the verdict. Then Portugal. She picked up her soup. "Don't say then Portugal like it's a contingency. It's a plan." "It's a plan," I said. Detective opened one eye, verified that we were still there, and closed it again. Home. The trial of Richard Allen Pemberton, in the matter of the United States of America versus Richard Allen Pemberton, began on a Monday morning in January in the Edward R. Roybal Federal Building on Spring Street in downtown Los Angeles, in a courtroom that had the specific quality of federal justice. High ceilings with paneling, the particular gravity of a room that has been designed to communicate that what happens here matters and will be recorded and will outlast everyone in it. I was there every day, not as a witness. My testimony had been deposed months earlier, in the same careful way that every piece of evidence in the case had been handled. I was there as a private investigator who had spent 8 months building the case that was now being presented, sitting in the gallery with Sarah and watching the machinery of justice do the slow, necessary work of translating what we'd found into something permanent. Pemberton sat at the defense table with his legal team and looked exactly as he always had in the photographs and the surveillance footage, and the single time I'd seen him in person at Incheon Airport, being escorted toward a Korean police vehicle. Composed, unhurried, the particular stillness of a man who had spent his life in rooms where authority was being decided and had learned to occupy those rooms as if they were already his. He was 67 years old. He wore dark suits that were neither expensive enough to alienate the jury nor cheap enough to suggest he was performing financial distress. His legal team was excellent, reduced from its original configuration by the frozen accounts. Working on a retainer that Allenbach's cooperation had established was significantly smaller than Pemberton's previous legal budgets, but still excellent. They challenged everything, every piece of evidence, every chain of custody, every cooperating witness's credibility. They were doing exactly what very good defense attorneys do, and doing it well. It wasn't enough. On the 4th day, Pemberton did something that surprised his legal team, the prosecution, the judge, and everyone in the gallery except perhaps me. He requested permission to make a brief statement to the court. The judge, after extended sidebar, allowed it, under strict parameters. No cross-examination. Pemberton stood. He looked at the jury. He looked at the gallery. He looked, briefly and directly, at me. And then he spoke for approximately 4 minutes in the measured, precise voice of a man who had spent decades in rooms full of smart people and had become very good at commanding their attention. He said that he understood the nature of the charges against him. He said that he did not dispute the facts of what Project Chrysalis had done, that research had been conducted on human subjects without their full and informed consent, and that people had been harmed. He said he took responsibility for the decisions he had made as the program's primary funder and strategic director. And then he said the thing that silenced the courtroom. He said, the science was real, is real. The modifications that Project Chrysalis achieved in compliant subjects represent the most significant advance in human neurological capability that has been documented in the modern era. That the method was wrong does not change what the method produced. That knowledge exists now. It cannot be unlearned by any verdict this court delivers. The future this program was building will arrive regardless, with or without me, through legal means or illegal ones, because the potential it demonstrated is too significant for human ambition to leave alone. He paused. He looked at the jury. I am not arguing for my freedom, he said. I am telling you what is true. He sat down. The judge called a recess. In the gallery, the room processed what it had just heard. The prosecutors exchanged a look of people who were aware that a man had just made their sentencing argument for them, while simultaneously saying something that would live in case law for a very long time. Sarah leaned to me. He's not wrong, she said very quietly. About the science. No, I said, he's not wrong about the science. That's the part that doesn't go away with the verdict. No, I said, it doesn't. We sat with that for the remainder of the recess, and then the court came back into session, and the trial continued. Carter arrived on the third week of the trial, which I mentioned not because the timing was significant, but because it was the kind of thing that happens when you've been spending long days in a federal courtroom and come home to an office that has gradually, over 3 weeks, begun to feel lived in again. He was on a fire escape. Black, short-haired, the specific combination of underweight and completely self-possessed that characterized a cat who had been managing his own affairs for some time and had decided, based on a cost-benefit analysis I was not privy to, that the fire escape of the building above Golden Dragon restaurant was an acceptable next chapter. He looked at me through the window with the flat, assessing expression of a cat who is not asking for anything and would like you to know that. I opened the window. He came in, detective, from the desk chair, opened both eyes and arrived at a series of rapid conclusions that express themselves as a specific quality of stillness that precedes a decision. He looked at the new arrival. The new arrival looked at him. Neither of them moved for approximately 30 seconds. Then detective went back to sleep, which was either acceptance or the feline equivalent of tabling a discussion for a later meeting. Sarah came in from the kitchenette with 2 cups of coffee, saw the black cat sitting in the middle of the office floor surveying the room, as if he were assessing a property purchase, and stopped. Where did he come from? She said. Fire escape, I said. Is he hurt? Thin, not hurt. She set down the coffee and crouched to his level with the ease of someone who knows how to approach a cat that hasn't decided about you yet. He looked at her. She looked at him. He bumped his head against her hand once, very briefly, in the manner of a dignitary acknowledging a greeting without committing to a relationship. Carter, Sarah said, we're naming him? I said, I'm naming him, she said. Carter, like Sheriff Carter. I looked at the black cat, who was now sitting with the upright, purposeful posture of a cat who has somewhere be and is merely pausing here temporarily, and who did in fact have the specific air of a man who had walked into a chaotic situation and immediately begun assessing how to bring it under control. Carter, I said. He looked at me. All right, I said. Carter it is. Miles arrived 20 minutes later, took one look at the new development, and said, Detective is going to have opinions about this. Detective is asleep, Sarah said. Detective is never asleep, Miles said. He's processing. This turned out to be accurate. Over the following 3 days, Detective and Carter negotiated a territorial arrangement that was never openly discussed but became, through a series of small adjustments and deliberate spatial choices, an established fact. Detective kept the desk chair. Carter claimed the windowsill above the fire escape. The space between them was a shared zone that both cats used without apparent conflict, in the way of 2 professionals who had decided that coexistence is more practical than competition. Mrs. Chun, when she came up with egg rolls on the 4th day and found 2 cats instead of 1, looked at the situation with the expression of someone revising a mental model. Carter, Sarah said, introducing them. Mrs. Chun looked at the black cat on the windowsill, then at Detective on the chair, then at me. You need a bigger office, she said. We're fine, I said. You need a bigger office, she said again, with a particular repetition of someone who has made an observation and intends it to be received rather than dismissed, and went back downstairs. I looked at the 2 cats occupying the 2 prime real estate positions in the office above Golden Dragon. I looked at the case boards on the walls. 8 months of 7 cities, almost ready to come down. She might be right, I said. She's always right, Sarah said. That's been established. Before I continue, If you're still here, you've been with Frank and Sarah Cross 3 seasons and more cities than I can count on one hand. That means more than I can say. Hit the like button. Subscribe. Ring that bell, because this is the last chapter, and it deserves a full house. Now, back to the courtroom. Eleanor Voss testified on day 11. She was transported from Austrian federal custody to Los Angeles under a cooperation agreement that had taken Torres's office and the Austrian Ministry of Justice 3 weeks to finalize. She wore dark clothes and the same composed bearing she'd had in the Café Central, and she testified for 2 full days with the methodical precision of scientists describing the methodology of an experiment, which was, in its way, exactly what she was doing. She described the Geneva meeting. She described Pemberton's vision and her own contribution to its architecture. She described every design decision in the Chrysalis framework, the node independence, the consent language, the jurisdictional mapping, with the same analytical clarity she'd shown in Vienna, and she did not flinch from any of it. On cross-examination, Pemberton's lead attorney asked her whether she believed, at the time of the Geneva meeting, that what they were planning was illegal. In many of the jurisdictions where we plan to operate, Voss said, the legal frameworks were sufficiently ambiguous that the activity could be structured to be technically compliant. That was part of the design. But did you believe it was wrong? The attorney asked. A pause. The specific Voss pause, inhabited and precise. I believe the research was important enough to justify the method, she said. I believe that for 14 years. I stopped believing it sometime in the past 8 months, while watching a private investigator from Los Angeles dismantle everything I built, city by city, and speak in each city about the specific people who've been put inside it. She looked at the jury. I was wrong. I knew I was wrong when I designed it. That is the most honest answer I can give. The courtroom absorbed this. Pemberton was looking at the table in front of him. His expression was exactly what it had been for 11 days. Composed, unhurried, the stillness of a man who had already moved past the present moment in his own mind and was thinking about something else. I watched him from the gallery. I had spent 8 months thinking about Richard Pemberton, and I had learned, in those months, that the most dangerous thing about him was not his money or his network or his operational sophistication. It was a quality that Voss had just described from the witness stand, the absolute conviction that what he was building was important enough to justify how he was building it. That conviction didn't require the network. It didn't require the money. It was internal, structural, the kind of thing that a verdict addressed only partially. The jury saw a man who had funded the illegal modification of 135 human beings. I saw all of that, and I also saw the thing underneath it, the man who had looked at the future and decided he was the one to build it, and who was, even now, thinking about how. These were not mutually exclusive observations. Kurt Allenbach testified on day 13. He was precise, exhaustive, and clearly relieved. The specific relief of a man who has been holding something very heavy for a very long time and has finally been allowed to set it down in a room where other people can help carry it. 3 of the Los Angeles survivors testified on days 15 and 16. They had asked to testify. The prosecution had asked them if they were sure, and they had said yes, they were sure, because they wanted the jury to understand what the consent forms had said and what had actually happened, and they wanted to be in a room when the verdict was delivered. I sat in the gallery for their testimony and did not write anything in my notebook. Some things don't need notes. Some things you carry without them. The defense called 9 witnesses over 5 days. Character testimony. Expert witnesses challenging the scientific methodology of the prosecution's evidence. A former colleague of Voss's who disputed her characterization of the research ethics discussions at the founding stage. Pemberton's attorneys were thorough and prepared and operating against a documentary record that was, as a U.S. attorney had said, 30 years' worth of comprehensive. The closing arguments took 2 days. The jury deliberated for 4. 4 days is a long time to wait for something you've been working toward for longer than that. We waited in the office above Golden Dragon, because that was where we'd started this case, and it was where we were going to be when it ended. Miles was there. Torres came by on the second day of deliberations and sat in the extra chair, the one that wasn't the desk chair, which was detectives, or the windowsill, which was Carter's, and drank Mrs. Chen's coffee and didn't say much, because there wasn't much to say that wasn't redundant to everything we'd already said. Carter. over the 2 days of Torres's visits, developed a tentative professional respect for Torres that expressed itself as sitting approximately 18 inches from him and occasionally glancing in his direction. Torres noticed this and said nothing about it, which was consistent with his general approach to situations that didn't require comment. On the third evening of deliberations, Miles made pasta from scratch in the office kitchenette, which he did occasionally when he needed something to do with his hands that wasn't keyboard, and the four of us ate at the work table beneath the case wall and talked about things that had nothing to do with the trial. Sarah told Torres about the Café Central, about Voss walking in and sitting down at the table and saying, without prompting, that she knew who we were and had been expecting us. She designed the whole network, Torres said, and she was the one who walked into it voluntarily at the end. She walked into the facts, Sarah said. She didn't see a way to argue with them anymore. Or she didn't want to, Torres said. Both, I said. We ate pasta under 32 feet of case wall in the office above Golden Dragon, and Detective slept on the chair, and Carter sat on the windowsill, watching the street below with the focused attention of a cat conducting ongoing surveillance. And it was one of those evenings that felt, while it was happening, like something worth remembering. The fourth day, the jury came back. The foreperson was a retired schoolteacher from Pasadena, a compact woman in her 60s who read the verdicts with the measured deliberateness of someone who understood that the words she was saying had weight and was giving them their full measure of it. Guilty on all counts. 18 counts in total. Conspiracy, fraud, unauthorized human experimentation, assault causing grievous bodily harm, wire fraud across multiple international jurisdictions, money laundering, racketeering. The federal sentencing guidelines with consolidated charges pointed to a number that was, in practical terms, the rest of Richard Allen Pemberton's natural life. The courtroom did not erupt. These things rarely do. In federal court, the judge thanked the jury. The attorneys made the necessary procedural acknowledgments. Sentencing was scheduled for 60 days out. I watched Pemberton's face. He received the verdict with the same composed stillness he'd worn for 3 weeks. He looked at the jury foreperson as she read each count. He nodded very slightly after the final guilty, in the way of a man acknowledging a calculation that has come out as expected. Then he turned, not toward his legal team, not toward the prosecution, toward the gallery, toward me. He looked at me for 3 seconds, the specific 3 seconds between the foreperson finishing and the judge calling order, direct, steady, the gaze of a man who had decided something and wanted the person across the room to know it without saying it. It was not a threat. It was something more unsettling than a threat. It was the look of someone who had been paying attention. Then the judge called order, and the moment was over, and Pemberton turned back to the front of the courtroom with the unhurried composure of a man who had somewhere else to be. Torres was beside me in the gallery. He had watched the exchange. "What was that?" he said very quietly. "I don't know," I said, which was the truth. And the part that sat with me afterward on the drive back to 4th Street was not the guilty verdict, which was right and necessary and the culmination of 8 months in 9 cities and 135 people, but the 3 seconds of Pemberton's attention and the specific quality of it, and the fact that I didn't know what it meant. 16 years in this business. I've learned to pay attention to the things I don't know the meaning of yet. The sentencing hearing was 60 days later. Pemberton received life, with the possibility of parole after 30 years, which at 67 was a functional equivalent of life without parole, and everyone in the courtroom understood that. He read his statement before sentencing in the same measured voice he'd used for his trial statement. It was briefer this time. He said he accepted the court's judgment. He said the work he had set in motion would continue through others, through legitimate means, because the science was real and the future it pointed toward was inevitable. He said he had no regrets about the vision, only about the method, he said. And this was the last thing. The thing, he said, looking not at the judge, but at some middle distance that wasn't the courtroom, as if he were speaking to something the rest of us couldn't see. I've learned a great deal from this experience. That knowledge doesn't go away with a verdict. The judge acknowledged the statement and proceeded to sentencing. I wrote those 8 words in my notebook. I looked at them on the drive home. A man who builds for 20 years doesn't stop building just because the walls come down. He had money that hadn't been found. Not everything Allenbach knew, not everything the Swiss records contained, because Pemberton had been building for 20 years and had built the way careful architects build, with redundancies they don't tell their contractors about. He had knowledge that nothing took away. He had, somewhere in that stillness, a quality that confinement addresses only on the surface. He was going to federal prison. He was also, I was fairly certain, going to spend a considerable amount of time thinking. I didn't know what he would do with what he thought. That was the honest answer. I put the notebook away and looked out the car window at Los Angeles doing what it always did. Moving, building, becoming whatever was going to be next, indifferent to verdicts and consequences, and the long work of accountability. Committed only to its own forward motion. It was, in that moment, the most Los Angeles thing I had ever seen. Torres came to the office the following week. Carter assessed him from the windowsill. Detective ignored him from the chair, which was the highest honor detective gave to anyone. Torres sat in the extra chair and put a piece of paper on the work table. Pemberton's attorney submitted a formal request, he said, 3 days after sentencing. He wants a meeting before he's transferred to the federal facility. I looked at the piece of paper. I didn't pick it up I said, "You," Torres said, specifically, by name, Frank Murray. He specified no lawyers, no recording, no federal personnel in the room. Just you. Sarah was at the window. She had heard this. She didn't look at me. I sat with it. The 3-second look in the courtroom. The sentencing statement. The 8 words in my notebook. That knowledge doesn't go away with a verdict. A man who had spent 14 years building something he believed in, and who had just spent 63 days watching the most comprehensive criminal case in 30 years of federal prosecution be laid against him, and who had requested a meeting not with his attorneys or with Torres or with the U.S. attorney, but with a private investigator from Los Angeles who had started pulling threads in Seoul 8 months ago. I picked up the piece of paper. I read it. I set it back down. "No," I said. Torres nodded once. The nod of a man who had brought the request because it was his job to bring it and had already formed his own view about the answer. "I'll notify his attorneys," he said. "Torres," I said. He looked at me. "If he requests again," I said, "after he's transferred, after he's had time, if he requests again through official channels and it becomes relevant to an ongoing investigation, I'll let you know," Torres said. He picked up the piece of paper and put it in his briefcase and looked around the office. At the boards that were almost empty now, the pins and threads and photographs coming down one by one as the federal team processed and archived everything. At Detective on the chair. At Carter on the windowsill. "New cat," he said. "Carter," Sarah said. Torres looked at Carter for a moment. Carter looked at Torres. Something passed between them that I couldn't fully characterize, but which seemed mutual. "Good name," Torres said. He stood. He buttoned his coat. He extended his hand to me, which was something Torres had not done in the entire length of our professional relationship, and we shook hands, which was the specific formal acknowledgement of 2 people who have done something together that neither of them will forget. "Thank you, Frank," he said, "for all of it." "Thank you, Torres," I said, "for answering the phone." He almost smiled, the Torres version of a smile, which was the faintest possible compression at the corners of his mouth that you had to be watching for or catch. He went downstairs. A moment later, I heard the door to 4th Street open and close. The office was quiet. Detective. "Carter." "Sarah." "Portugal," Sarah said. "Portugal," I said. "Tuesday," she said. "I already booked it," I said. She turned from the window. "You already booked it." 2 weeks ago," I said. "The day after the verdict." She looked at me for a moment with the expression that I had been working to earn for 8 months and had apparently, finally, managed. "2 weeks ago," she said. "I told you I meant it." I said. Carter, from the windowsill, made a sound that was not quite a meow and not quite a commentary, but was somewhere in the vicinity of both. "He approves," Sarah said. "He would know," I said. Miles took care of the cats while we were gone. He texted me on the 2nd day. "Detective has accepted Carter. This is being marked as a historic diplomatic achievement." On the 4th day, Carter knocked over my energy drink collection. I think he did it on purpose. I think I respect him for it. On the 6th day, he sent a photograph. Detective and Carter, on the windowsill above the fire escape, sitting side by side in particular companionable silence of two creatures who have arrived at an arrangement they are both content with. Detective's gray against Carter's black, both of them looking at the street below with the focused authority of a professional surveillance team that has reached a point in a long operation where they can work without speaking. I looked at the photograph sitting at a cafe table in Belém, which is the part of Lisbon that sits at the edge of the Tagus where it opens into the Atlantic, with the Torre de Belém visible downstream in the November light. Lisbon's light, which is different from every other light in Europe, warmer and more horizontal, and a specific color of a place that has been facing the sea for 600 years, coming across the water in a way that made the whole city look like it had been arranged. For exactly this kind of afternoon, the pastiest and nada were, as Priya had said in New Delhi, worth the flight. Miles says Detective and Carter have reached a détente, I said. Sarah looked at the photograph across the table. Good, she said. They have a lot in common. 2 cats, I said. Both of them showed up, she said, and stayed, without being asked, and established their territory without a fight. She set the phone down. There are worse qualities. The Tagus moved beyond the cafe. A tram went along the waterfront road, in particular orange yellow, that Lisbon trams have maintained for approximately forever. The pasties were warm and the coffee was strong, and the light was doing what Lisbon light did in the late afternoon, lying across everything like a benediction. Tell me what you're thinking, Sarah said. Pemberton, I said, because that was what I was thinking. The way you keep thinking about a thing that isn't done even when the case is closed. The meeting request, she said. The sentencing statement, I said. The 8 words. That knowledge doesn't go away with a verdict. He was talking about the science, the genetic modification research. But he was also talking about himself, Sarah said. Yes, I said. She picked up her coffee. He's in federal prison, Frank, for life. Yes, I said. That's real, she said. That happened. The verdict happened, and the sentence happened, and 135 people have their names in a court record and a federal file and the testimony of a man who has been held accountable for what he did to them. Yes, I said. All of that is real. And you're sitting in Lisbon thinking about what he does next. I'm sitting in Lisbon, I said, thinking about the fact that I declined a meeting request from a man who specifically asked to speak with me and whose specific request was not a threat and was not an apology and was something I don't have a clean word for. Curiosity, Sarah said. I looked at her. He's curious about you, she said, in the way that someone who has spent 20 years building something that you dismantled gets curious about the person who dismantled it. He wants to understand what he missed, what he got wrong about you specifically. She set down her coffee. That's not dangerous, Frank. That's just human. I sat with that. The Tagus moved. The tram went back the other way. Maybe, I said. It's enough, she said. For today, this is enough. She was right. She was nearly always right, which was one of the foundational things about 16 years of working with someone. The way you come to understand that certain voices in your head are more reliable than others, and you learn to know which ones to listen to. I looked at the Tagus, at the Torre de Belém downstream, the late light on the water, the specific color of Lisbon in November going toward evening. Enough. For today, it was enough. We flew home on a Sunday, Los Angeles from the air in December, coming in over the Pacific with the sun already low and the city spread out below us in particular way it always is from altitude. Not a skyline, not a center, just light in every direction as far as you can see. The flat, enormous fact of a city that keeps going regardless, that has been becoming whatever it's going to be next since before anyone thought to ask it what that was. Home. Miles had cleaned the office. Not completely. The monitors were still there, the workstation, the professional infrastructure of a man who did not stop working between cases, only redirected. But the case board were down. The threads and the pins and the photographs and the satellite imagery and 32 feet of the shape of something that had been built to be invisible, all of it archived, logged, delivered to the federal system as evidence in a case that was now decided. The boards were clean. Detective was on the desk chair. Carter was on the windowsill. Mrs. Chun brought egg rolls up approximately 4 minutes after we came through the door. How was Portugal? She said. Very good, Sarah said. The pasties de nata were worth the flight. Mrs. Chen nodded with the expression of someone who already knew this. Did you eat properly? We did, I said. Good, she said. She looked at the two cats in their respective positions. Carter's been watching the street. Very serious. He takes his responsibilities seriously, Sarah said. Good quality, Mrs. Chen said, and went back downstairs. I sat at the desk. Not the desk chair. Detective had that. The standing position at the corner of the desk, which had been my working position for 16 years. I put my hands on the surface and looked at the clean boards and the two cats and the monitors and the window that looked out over 4th Street, the office above Golden Dragon Restaurant. 4th Street, Los Angeles. 16 years. In a federal facility somewhere in the federal prison system, Richard Allen Pemberton was beginning the process of becoming a man serving a life sentence. His attorneys were filing the first of what would be many appeals. His accounts were frozen. His network was dismantled. The 4 people who had been closest to the operational and strategic heart of what he'd built were in custody in 4 countries, cooperating with the respective jurisdictions that held them. In Yokohama and Seoul, and New Delhi and Manila, and Hong Kong and Los Angeles, 135 people were rebuilding. Some of them were doing well. Some of them were not. All of them had names now, in federal court records, in the testimony of the trial that had just concluded, in the specific permanent record that justice makes when it does what it's supposed to do. The Pemberton file was closed. My notebook was on the desk. I opened it to the last entry. 8 words, written in a federal courthouse on the day of sentencing. That knowledge doesn't go away with a verdict. I looked at them for a moment. Then I turned to a fresh page. Carter, from the windowsill, glanced at me once with the calm professional attention of a cat who has taken on the responsibility of watching a particular stretch of street and does not intend to be distracted from it. Detective from the desk chair opened one eye, verified that everything was as it should be, and closed it again. Sarah put a cup of coffee on the desk beside my notebook, the way she always did, the way she had done for 16 years, quietly, without making a thing, the small, continuous evidence of a partnership that had outlasted more than one person had thought it would when it started. I picked up the coffee. I looked at the fresh page. Somewhere in the city, the next case was already out there, moving through the ordinary life of Los Angeles the way things that need to be found always move, in the specific dark that exists between what people know and what they're willing to say, in the gap between the story someone tells and the one that's true. It would find its way to me, or I would find my way to it. That's how it works. That's how it's always worked. 16 years in this business. And the one thing I've learned is that the truth doesn't find people. People find the truth, but only if someone keeps looking. Project Chrysalis is closed. Richard Pemberton is in federal prison. 135 people have their names in a court record. That's real. That's permanent. That's what this was for. If these cases have mattered to you the way they've mattered to me, and if you've been here since Seoul, you know they have, hit that like button, subscribe, ring the bell, because the office above Golden Dragon is still open. The fresh page is blank. And the next case is already out there. I'm Frank Murray. I don't quit. Neither should you.